John met Maria on a breezy September evening at a rooftop party he almost didn't attend. The sky was painted with soft golds and purples, and the hum of conversation floated over the city. She stood alone near a table of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, looking both out of place and quietly beautiful. Something about her stillness drew him in. He offered her a drink and cracked a joke about the sad-looking hummus bowl. She laughed, not politely, but with real warmth, and that laugh stuck with him. They talked for hours that night, trading stories about bad dates, childhood memories, and books they'd both loved but forgotten. John felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, possibility. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he had to explain himself. Maria understood him. Her eyes didn't just look at him, they saw him. When she gave him her number at the end of the night, it felt like more than a kind gesture. It felt like the beginning of something rare. John walked home with a quiet, hopeful ache in his chest, unaware that this moment, so small and unplanned, would change his life forever. The first few months with Maria felt like stepping into a dream John hadn't realized he'd been longing for. Everything moved fast but never rushed. It was as if the world had finally adjusted its pace to match theirs. They slipped into each other's lives like puzzle pieces, laughing at the same obscure references, finishing each other's thoughts without trying. Their tiny apartment became a sanctuary. Mismatched mugs, worn paperbacks stacked on windowsills. Vinyl records humming through lazy Sunday afternoons. They cooked together, burned things together, and fell asleep tangled in warmth and whispers. Maria never talked much about her past, especially not about Grant, the man she'd been with for nearly 7 years. When his name did come up, it was in passing, emotionless, like reciting fact from an old job you barely remember. John took it as a sign that she had moved on, that he was her future, not just a detour. Their wedding was small, intimate, held in the backyard of a friend's cottage, string lights above, wildflowers below, and teary vows that felt like promises carved in a time. John remembered looking at her that day, her eyes wide and clear, and thinking, this is it. This is the woman I will grow old with. There was no doubt, no fear, only gratitude that somehow, in a world full of chaos and misconnections, they had found each other. What he didn't know, then, was that love, even when it feels absolute, can be quietly haunted by the ghosts we never fully bury. It started with little things, easily missed. If John hadn't been so attuned to Maria's rhythms. A flicker in her smile when someone mentioned a name from her past. A glance too long at a photo on someone's phone. It wasn't overt. If anything, it was the subtlety of it that made it more unsettling. Maria, once effortless in her affection, began to carry a certain weight in her presence, as though she was holding something tightly just beneath the surface. When acquaintances brought up Grant, John noticed the way her posture changed. Her shoulders stiffened. Her tone brightened just a shade too much. It was the kind of forced lightness people use when they're trying to appear untouched by something that clearly still stirs them. At first, John chalked it up to awkward memories. Everyone has a past, he told himself, but the seed of unease had been planted. He began to watch more closely. Her eyes sometimes drifted during conversations, like she was somewhere else entirely. When he asked what was on her mind, she always offered vague replies, just tired, or it's nothing. But John could feel it, the growing silence between them, the emotional static humming just beneath their once clear connection. Something was shifting, tilting the balance. He didn't know what it was, not yet, but he knew this. The woman he had built a future with was slowly retreating into a space he could no longer reach. And he was terrified of what, or who, might be waiting there. It was supposed to be a fun, wine-filled night with old friends, but instead, it became the first undeniable crack in John's sense of security. They were at a cozy holiday gathering, candles flickering, laughter bouncing off the walls, when Maria's college friend Delia began reminiscing. She mentioned Grant, casually at first, a name John hadn't heard in months. Maria froze for just a second. Then, suddenly, she was engaged, asking questions with a little too much curiosity. Is he still living near the lake? Did he ever finish that studio project? Her voice tried to sound breezy, but her eyes betrayed her. They were lit with something John couldn't name, but it burned him all the same. Later that night, when he found her scrolling through Grant's Instagram, she gave a half-hearted excuse about checking if he still had that awful goatee. She laughed, but the moment felt brittle, hollow. John didn't confront her. Not yet. He wanted to believe it was nothing, a passing curiosity, a moment of nostalgic wandering. But something inside him had shifted. He began to question things he never used to. Her late nights, her distant glances, the increasing number of just work excuses. The warmth between them was slowly being replaced by a quiet chill. He wanted to believe in the woman who promised him forever. But he could feel her slipping, inch by inch, towards something or someone else. And for the first time, he didn't know how to pull her back. The change in Maria wasn't sudden. It was a slow, almost imperceptible unraveling. She became quieter, distracted, like her mind had taken up permanent residence somewhere he couldn't follow. Conversations that once stretched late into the night now ended in monosyllables. When John asked what was wrong, she would smile, thin, mechanical, and say, "Just tired," as if that were enough to cover the growing silence between them. She began coming home later, her explanations vague and carefully nonchalant. "Work's been crazy," she'd say, peeling off her coat with a sigh, eyes already on her phone. John tried to stay grounded, telling himself he was overthinking, but his instincts buzzed with unease. Something wasn't right. One night, while she showered, he gave in to a gnawing temptation and checked her phone. There was nothing. No texts, no missed calls, no digital breadcrumbs. But it was too clean, like someone had scrubbed it down. And that in itself was damning. It wasn't just what he found, it was what he didn't. The emptiness on her screen mirrored the emptiness creeping into their home. Still, he tried. He planned surprise date nights, cooked her favorite dishes, even bought her flowers for no reason. Sometimes she responded with a flicker of the woman he loved, a real laugh, a lingering touch, but those glimpses were fleeting, like echoes from another life. She always drifted back into that unreachable fog, and John was left sitting in the quiet, wondering how you fight for someone who's already somewhere else in their heart. It was a Wednesday evening, quiet except for the hum of the oven and the scent of garlic bread filling the kitchen. John had made lasagna, Maria's favorite, in hopes of reviving even a spark of their old connection. But as he set the table, her phone, left unusually behind, buzzed with a call. It was Delia, curious and slightly concerned. John answered, expecting a quick message. "Hey, is Maria there? We were supposed to meet for coffee 2 hours ago." John's heart slowed, then sped up in a dizzying loop. "She told me she was working late," he replied. There was a pause, awkward and heavy. "Oh, maybe I got the day wrong," Delia muttered, but they both knew she hadn't. When Maria walked in hours later, windswept and casually smiling, John sat in the dark, waiting. "Where were you?" he asked. Voice even but tight. Her expression flickered, a second too long, before she said, "At work. Like I told you." When he brought up Delia's call, she feigned surprise, then softened into a performance of guilt. "I forgot. Things have been so crazy." She tried to change the subject, to disarm him with warmth. But something inside John had calcified. It wasn't just the lie. It was the ease with which she told it. The calm deflection, the quick pivot to dinner. That night, for the first time, he looked at his wife and wondered not just where she had been, but who she had become. And deep down, he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. It was the phone call that shattered the last illusion. Mid-afternoon, while John was working from home, Maria rang, her voice shaky, breath catching. "Grant's been in an accident," she said, skipping pleasantries, skipping everything. "A truck hit his car. He's in surgery." John froze, the name slicing through him like ice. Grant, not a colleague, not a friend, her ex. "How do you even know?" he asked, trying to mask the rising tide in his chest. "Delia called me. She knows his sister," Maria replied, her words tumbling out fast, urgent. "Can you take me to the hospital? Please." The drive was silent save for Maria's sniffles and the pounding in John's head. His knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. He didn't understand. Why was she this torn up? Why did she look like someone had just ripped out her heart? As they pulled into the hospital lot, he dared to ask, "Why does this hurt you so much?" Maria turned to him, eyes red and wet. "Because I still love him." 6 words. 6 nails in the coffin of everything they'd built. She didn't even seem to realize what she'd said until the silence between them thickened like smoke. Then she bolted, disappearing into the building without a backward glance. Without a word of thanks, as if John was just her driver, not her husband. He sat there, stunned, crushed by a truth that had been waiting all along, buried under months of silence, lies. and the soft cruelty of emotional distance. John sat in the hospital parking lot for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the entrance where Maria had disappeared without a second thought. Her confession echoed in his mind like a bell he couldn't unring. I still love him. No hesitation. No apology. Just the raw truth, dropped in his lap like a grenade. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stopped. Stopped feeling, stopped believing, stopped pretending that the woman he loved was still his. That night, he returned to their apartment, if it could still be called home, and moved through the rooms like a ghost. Every corner whispered memories, now poisoned by doubt. The bookshelf they'd built together. The framed wedding photo above the mantel. The coffee mug she always used. All of it felt foreign, like walking through a museum of a life that had never really been his. He packed with quiet precision, taking only what he needed. Clothes, a few books, important documents. Everything else, furniture, gifts, shared knickknacks, felt tainted, heavy with betrayal. Before leaving, he scrawled a simple note and left it on the kitchen counter. He can have you now. No dramatics. No lengthy explanations. Just the brutal clarity of a heart finally breaking. That night, John turned off his phone, shut out the noise, and walked away from the woman who had taken his trust and shattered it with a single, thoughtless truth. The marriage was over. What remained was grief and a long road back to himself. The days that followed blurred together, wrapped in a thick fog of disbelief and grief. John stayed with his longtime friend Leo, whose quiet presence and non-judgmental support became a lifeline. The apartment was small, cluttered with books and half-finished guitar projects, but it felt like safety. Meanwhile, Maria's calls poured in, texts, voicemails, emails, each one more frantic than the last. The first messages were confused. Where are you? What's going on? Then came the apologies cloaked in desperation. Please, John, let's talk. That wasn't what I meant. She left a voicemail that cracked through the silence of Leo's guest room like thunder. Her voice was raw with tears. I was just emotional. I didn't mean it. I love you. But John didn't reply. He listened to every word, and still, nothing shifted. The truth had already settled in like concrete. Freya, no. Maria had confessed with too much ease. Her mouth had spoken the words her heart had already written. And now, she wanted to backtrack, rewrite, rewind. But John knew better. People don't say, I still love him unless part of them has already left. Through mutual friends, he learned she was visiting Grant every day in the hospital, staying for hours, bringing coffee, talking like old times. So much for just emotional. Even her attempts at damage control were lined with new betrayals. Maria hadn't just broken his trust. She'd shattered the version of reality John had believed in. And no apology, no letter, no tear could make him unsee the truth. 3 months later, they met one last time, not for reconciliation, but to divide the remnants of a life that no longer fit. The cafe was quiet, sunlight casting pale shadows across the table where Maria sat, looking smaller, thinner. Her eyes sunken from sleepless nights. John felt a flicker of something, compassion, maybe, but it was quickly eclipsed by the memory of that moment in the car, the words she had spoken so easily. Thank you for meeting me, she whispered. He nodded, expression unreadable. When she asked if that was all he wanted, to talk logistics, he replied with quiet finality, yes. Her face crumpled. She reached for his hand, but he pulled back. You said you love another man, he said, and you kept that truth from me for months. Maria tried to explain, tears falling fast, her voice trembling with regret. But John had heard it all before, in voicemails, letters, desperate texts. He had lived every version of her regret, and none of it changed the fact that trust, once shattered, doesn't stitch itself back together cleanly. As he stood to leave, she begged, please don't go. But this time, he didn't look back. Some endings aren't meant to be softened. In today's world of constant digital connection and emotional distractions, it's easy to blur the lines between loyalty and longing. This story is a reminder that emotional honesty matters just as much as physical faithfulness. If something feels off in your relationship, don't ignore it. Trust your instincts. Communicate openly, even when it's uncomfortable. And most importantly, know your worth. You deserve someone whose heart is fully present, not stuck in the past. Don't wait for a betrayal to wake you up. Love should feel safe, not uncertain. Protect your peace, and never settle for half-hearted love.